Welcome! I'm not going to do my usual weather summary for this week because most of the literature is full of information about the coronavirus, so I thought I would do the same thing. And one disturbing principle that seems to be rising at the moment is that in order to keep the economy running, there's an acceptable level of loss of life. Now, I take great exception to that principle, and this video is investigating the statistics of the coronavirus and what it would mean to the economy. So I hope you enjoy. I should first point out that I'm not a medical doctor. My doctorate is in astrophysics. But I do have 40 years of experience of analysing data, and I've written over 200 peer-reviewed papers based on those statistical analyses. So I think I have a pretty good handle on how to treat the coronavirus outbreak from a statistical point of view. And that's what I'm going to do here, and try to answer some of the questions that people have been asking. For example, how does the coronavirus's lethality compare with that of the flu? We've heard it's not as bad as the flu, it's about the same as the flu, or it's 10 times worse than the flu. Which is it? Does social distancing work? And if so, how does it work? How many could die if we let this disease run its course? And then what is the best plan for a quick recovery of the economy? Is it to approach a laissez-faire approach, or is it to impose all these restrictions? Now, I've been stuck at home just like you, with nothing better to do than to make videos. So here goes. So let's start by comparing the lethality of the flu with this COVID-19. So how deadly is the flu? There seems to be somewhere between 38 and 54 million infections of the flu in the US each year. Now, this is an estimate by the CDC. We don't know the actual numbers because a lot of people don't report to their doctors that they've had the flu. They just self-resolve at home. However, the cases that are confirmed, i.e. people that go to the doctors and test positive for the flu, is somewhere between 18 and 26 million. The number of deaths recorded as a result of those confirmed cases is between 24 and 60,000. So if you take the number of deaths and divide that by the number of confirmed cases, you get a lethality of 0.1 to 0.2%, which is very typical of the numbers that we hear all the time associated with the deadliness of the flu. So that process seems to work. So now let's take a look at COVID-19. Our first problem is that we don't know how many infections there are because we don't have universal testing yet in the US. Confirmed cases, we have 125,000, which now leads the world. But we've only had 2,227 deaths. This would give a lethality rate of 1.8%, which is about 10 times the lethality of the flu. That rate for the globe, however, is 4.7%. Why the difference? That is probably because most of the US cases have only been identified in the last few days, and so have not been able to resolve themselves either in recovery or death. And we could be facing up to 5,000 or more deaths from these first 125,000 cases when they eventually resolve themselves. So how bad is it? From a statistical point of view, it is looking very bad indeed. These are the cumulative rates of infections around the world. You can see in green, the Chinese had initially a very steep rate of rise, but then after about the middle of February, it started to level off. And that's because they'd put in place these social distancing measures and actually a fairly strong lockdown, particularly in the ravaged areas. And the red line is the world's total, and you can see that is going up very sharply and remaining to go up. And most of that is from Europe and the United States. So it is bad and it's getting worse, and we haven't seen any sign of it leveling off as yet. That's what we're really looking for. This is the profile of a pandemic. This is the number of cases registered by each country following the first case that was announced. You can see that 3 of them, China, Iran, and Switzerland, all have fairly high rise rates initially, and that's because they were testing adequately and you were actually seeing the spread of the disease. All the other countries, there's a lag from the time they get their first case to the time that this rise is demonstrated. And that means they were very slow getting off the mark. And the slowest is the light green one, which happens to be the United States. And even now, our profile doesn't look like any of the others, which still indicates to me that we're still not testing enough. So where are the hotspots in the United States? This all started in Washington State in the Northwest. Then New York has become this epicenter, but now New Jersey and other states around there are having similar problems. Louisiana seems to be a new hotspot. California, of course, is having problems, and so is Florida, apparently. We have Colorado, Michigan, and Illinois also starting to show up on this map. But my suspicion is that most of these states are very similar. It's just that there's a different rate of testing in each state. If you don't test, your numbers don't look too bad. Now, you often hear that the growth rate of this virus is exponential. What does that mean? Here's an example. Say that one patient, number one here, infects 3 others. And then those 3 infect 3 others, and so on. So after 1 infection cycle, you have 4 patients. After 2 infection cycles, you have 13 patients. After 3 infection cycles, you have 40 patients. After 4 infection cycles, you have 121 patients. And by the time you had got to the 10th infection cycle, you have 29,524 people. So one person can infect that many if everybody is being careless. That's how you get an exponential growth. So let's see how social distancing works. Say that original patient's being a little bit more careful. In fact, everybody's being a little bit more careful, and that one patient only infects 2 others, and so on. So after 1 cycle you have 3 patients, after 2 cycles you have 7, after 3 cycles you have 15, after 4 cycles you have 31, and after the 10th cycle you have 1,023. That is still really a big number, but it's a lot better than 29,000. So that's a slower exponential growth rate. So let's take a look at this exponential growth rate graphically for several different scenarios. The blue curve here is the one that I originally showed you with 1 patient infecting 3. So after 10 infection cycles, that one person was responsible for nearly 29,000 cases. And with the current lethality rate, that would be responsible for nearly 1,400 deaths. That's quite a lot to have in your conscience for not being careful. The orange curve shows if you're being a little bit more careful and only infect 2 other people, that's reduced to 1,023 patients and probably only about 47 deaths. Now, if you're being quite careful and only accidentally infect 1 person, by the end of the 10 cycles, you only have 10 people to be responsible for, and somewhere between 0 and 1 deaths. But of course, the only way to have a completely clear conscience is to infect nobody and maintain the social distancing rules. And at the end of the 10 cycles, you'll be the only one that's sick. Now, you're also going to have a much better chance of survival because there are not 29,000 people in the same hospital trying to recover from the coronavirus like you. So you're probably going to get much better treatment. According to some, we must keep the economy going at all costs. Exactly what are those costs? Business is more important than lives? Really? How many lives for how much money? I've never seen an economic breakdown of that. So whose lives are we talking about? Well, the old are most vulnerable to this particular disease, and that's 70 million Americans. Are they expendable? What about the other categories that are vulnerable? Cancer survivors, transplant patients, HIV/AIDS sufferers, heart disease, those with high blood pressure, diabetics, and pregnant women. That makes up another 86 million people in the United States. Now, there may be some duplication between the 3rd and 4th bullets here, but nonetheless, that's somewhere between 100 million and 150 million members of the American population. That's about half the population. So, can you, with all seriousness, say we could lose half the population? What would that do? It certainly would solve the problem about Social Security. It might also make Medicare and Medicaid a lot cheaper. But you've just lost half the American population, so half of your consumers are gone. So your economy automatically crashes by a factor of 2. And that doesn't sound good for the economy either. So these particular money-based arguments, I think, are irrelevant and, frankly, cruel. So what is the best economic strategy for a quick recovery? We have a case study going back to the 1919 Spanish flu, where 2 similar cities took very different approaches to the virus. One was Philadelphia and one was St. Louis. And this is the number of deaths per 100,000 of population. Philadelphia decided to pay no attention to the flu and had all its usual gatherings and celebrations and parades and things of that sort that it was used to. St. Louis put in fairly strict social distancing rules. Philadelphia ended up with over 10,000 deaths and a much larger proportion of the population that died from this particular disease. St. Louis, which put in very strong social distancing rules, limited its death toll to 700. That is over 15 times better than Philadelphia. So it would seem that St. Louis has the right way of limiting the number of deaths and also making the quickest economic recovery after the pandemic is finished. So what needs to be done? I think the first and foremost thing, we need to get our various supply chains working again, and that should be the responsibility of the federal government. At the moment, they're not doing that. We need to get medical supplies to protect the health workers. You can't have an army to fight this disease if most of your soldiers are sick. We need to get medical supplies to protect and treat the patients. We need more tests. We need more beds. We need more ventilators. And most of all, we need to get the food supply chains up and running again. It's ridiculous to be standing for hours in a crowded grocery shop trying to find bananas or toilet rolls or rice or whatever, when we all know full well there's plenty of those supplies anywhere and people are just hoarding them. So the staples of life should be rationed. You should only be able to buy one packet of toilet rolls, for example. We also got to stop price gouging. Shops should not be taking advantage of this by putting up their prices. And also racketeering, where people buy a lot of stuff and offer it at a high premium on the black market or online. That's again, the government should be putting standard rules in place across the country to stop this sort of thing. Because standing in line in a grocery store is the best way of passing on this virus. Here's some things that you could do. Wash your hands. Perhaps greet without hands, staying a reasonable distance apart. Use the free hand sanitizer whenever you can, or soap and water. But above all, keep calm and carry on. Actually, keep calm. No, that's it, just it. Just keep calm, everybody. If you're feeling unwell at the moment, stay indoors and don't infect anybody else. If it gets bad, immediately call your doctor. If you're feeling okay at the moment, please stay that way. Observe the distancing rules and the common sense rules that have been put in place, and you should be just fine. So until next time, goodbye.